Okay. Which war did you serve?
I served in the Vietnam conflict.
And what was your branch of service?
The U.S. Army.
What was your highest rank?
E5, Spec 5.
Okay. What were some locations that you served?
I served in Cu Chi, Vietnam, and then near the end of my year in Vietnam, Cu Chi was deactivated. They were starting to deactivate and consolidate, and then I moved into Long Binh, and from there I came home for leave, and then I went to Germany, and in Germany I was in Pirmasens, Germany.
Okay. Now, were you drafted or did you enlist?
I was drafted originally. I was a school teacher, received my draft notice, and then in the process of processing into the Army, I decided to enlist in order to get a better position and schooling and so forth.
Okay. Where were you living at the time?
I was living in Caribou, Maine. That was my hometown at the time.
Okay. Do you remember the date that you enlisted?
I don't really remember the date, no. I know I received my draft notice during the school year when I was teaching, and we had an option. You could either go in immediately, you could be deferred until the end of the school year, and that's what I opted to do. I finished out the school year, and then I went into basic training during the summer.
Okay. Can you tell me about some of the first days at boot camp and where that was?
I was at Fort Dix, New Jersey. It was the usual turmoil and apprehension and everything because at the time I had been teaching school for a couple of years, felt that I wasn't in the best of shape. I was a smoker at the time, so, the usual nervousness, but it turned out to be not too bad.
Okay. Do you remember any of your instructors?
I don't remember the name, but I know my drill sergeant turned out to be a pretty decent person. He was a college graduate. I think he was doing the drill sergeant position just so that he wouldn't be sent to Vietnam, actually.
Okay. How did your family feel about you having to serve?
They didn't say a lot about it, but I'm sure they were upset. The reason being that my uncle, who I actually am named after, George Smith, was killed in World War II. He actually died while my mother was pregnant with me. I believe he was killed in the big invasion of Normandy in, I don't know when that was, like December or January, and I was actually born in February.
Oh, okay. So
they never really spoke about him or any of the details about how he happened, died or his service or anything. And I think that's why I always was known as Michael or Mike to my family. Okay. Because the association with my Uncle George being killed.
Right. Can you talk about some of your training?
Yeah, I went through basic training. I did all right. A lot of it I found was like any big organization. It didn't amount to much. A lot of it was a waste of time. Hand-to-hand combat and using the bayonet to stab somebody and all that. It was just something I went through the motions in order to pass and get through it.
Right.
I didn't put a lot of effort into it. Then I went, because I had enlisted, for a specific job in the Army, which was a computer operator. I went to Fort Lee, Virginia, and did my schooling there in Fort Lee, Virginia. And it was a good, good learning process. The old-fashioned computers used the key punch cards, and we learned key punching, and I enjoyed being in Virginia.
How long were you there for?
It was like, I don't know, maybe 3 or 6 months. It wasn't for a whole year, but it was like for a while. There actually were 2 processes to the school. First, you went for stock control and accounting, and then you went, those who did well on the testing scores went on to the advanced computer schooling.
Okay.
And if you did good in the final thing of the computer schooling, you got an automatic Spec 4, which was, a couple steps up from being a private. So that was good also.
So that's what happened.
So I went to Vietnam. I was already at Spec 4.
Okay. So after Fort Lee, you went right to Vietnam?
Yes, yeah.
What were some of your first impressions there?
It was scary. I mean, when I first got there, because I went into, I believe it was Long Bend, and it was like a big cattle yard. They were processing so many people into Vietnam at that time. This was the beginning of 1970. And you went, you did the processing in, you tried to find a mattress or something to lay on. It was like a big open, we kind of camped out just in a big open field in the outdoors there. And every day they would have a muster where everybody would line up, and they would call names and you would have to listen for your name to see where you were going to be sent. And it took about maybe 3 to 5 days before actually I heard my name called. And then we were bused to, anybody that was going to that area of Vietnam, we were bused to Cu Chi.
Okay. So in Long Bend, you just had to wait for your assignment.
Yeah, more or less, I was just there to wait for my assignment and did some processing in. And, during the day, they would come and pick 10 people to go here to work and here to work or whatever. And you did whatever whatever job you were assigned to do, cleaning or helping out in, whatever happened to be your job for the day.
Okay. So in Cu Chi, what was your assignment?
Cu Chi, I went to the 94th Maintenance Company, and we supplied the infantry that were out in the fields or out in the different parts of that area. They would come into Cu Chi to order supplies and to pick up their supplies. And I worked in the computer van system. We had 2, they were like big tractor trailer type things actually. They call them computer vans. One had the actual computer, the other had the key punch machines, and in between was an office that was made just of plywood, kind of thrown together of plywood. And then attached to it was a big warehouse. My specific job was, they call it the editor, but I kept track of the key punch cards. When people came to pick up their equipment, we would pull the card and go from there. The computer van had like about 5 GIs, and it had 3 Vietnamese women that worked there.
Okay. So on a day-to-day, what would you do from the morning to night usually?
Get up. I go to breakfast at the mess hall. Then go to work, and we worked a regular 8-hour shift. I don't remember exactly when I worked nights and when I worked days, but there was a period of time when I worked the night shift, and then there was another period of time when I worked the day shift. I'd go in. It was pretty loose and not too structured. At times we could wear civilian clothes in the vans. The vans were kind of special back then because computers were just beginning, and it had to be in an air-conditioned condition. Anybody that came into the vans, they'd have to put booties over their shoes. They tried to keep it as dust-free as possible. So we kind of were isolated. We didn't have many, except for occasionally they'd bring a tour of officers through, but most of the time we just went in there and did our day's work. We weren't too bothered.
Okay.
I think for being in Vietnam, it was probably one of the better positions to go just as an enlisted person.
So what was it like working on one of these early computers?
It didn't take much skill. I mean, the Vietnamese women that worked for us, they did the actual key punching. There was a couple of the guys actually ran the programs through the computer. The rest of us, like my position, was to keep track of the comings and goings of the punch cards, and when the people came to get supplies. Couple other people had different positions, in the vans. It was like a regular office job, really, for me.
Okay.
Another good thing about it was because it took special training to work in the computer vans, and not anybody could do it, and there was a limited number of people assigned to each system throughout Vietnam. We were duty exempt, so we didn't have to pull KP or guard duty or any of that stuff, so that was a big plus.
Okay. Did you ever see any combat?
I didn't really see any combat, no, but there was Cu Chi was one of the bigger bases for that area. We had the hospital. A lot of the men that were out in the field would come into Cu Chi for a little R&R. There was a library there, and a big PX complex, and like a snack bar, and church. They had church services, and so I didn't actually see combat myself, but I was aware. I mean, I could hear the helicopters bringing people into the hospital, and occasionally would interact with people that were out in the field that came in for their R&R.
Right. So were there any casualties in your unit at all?
No. My unit, as I say, was a maintenance company. Cu Chi was pretty well protected. There were other Korean, I don't know if they were bases or whatever, but out beyond our perimeter. So we were fairly safe while I was there. However, the year before, during the 10th offensive, when the Viet Cong overran and infiltrated, they had got into Cu Chi also and blew up some of the helicopters and did some damage then.
Okay. So after Cu Chi, where did you head to?
After Cu Chi, we closed up, after I'd been there maybe 7 or 8 months, and they were de-escalating a lot in Vietnam and closing up a lot of the bases. We did close up the van, and moved into Long Binh. And there they were already, they already had people assigned to their vans, so we kind of were just extra, you know. And I was just waiting to leave there. And I got a drop. I didn't actually stay there for a full year. It was more like probably 10 months that I was in Vietnam.
Okay.
So I was able to come home. I went over after Christmas, and I came home before Christmas of the following year.
Okay. So in Long Binh, since other people already had the computer assignment,
Yeah.
what would you do during the day usually?
I don't remember too much about it. I was just waiting to get out of there.
Yeah.
So whatever job they, maybe helping out in a different office or in the personnel office, whatever they assigned us to do, we just did it. Kind of took it day by day.
Right. And then after Long Binh, you went home for a little bit.
Right. After Long Binh, one thing I didn't mention, while I was serving in Vietnam, of course, we had R&R. You had a choice to go to Australia or Hawaii or Thailand. There were like, I think 5 different choices. And I actually went to Thailand. I went to Bangkok, Thailand, because my best friend and another fellow teacher was assigned in Thailand, so I met him there in Bangkok, and we spent a week together, and we went to the coast of Thailand, to Pattaya Beach, and had a good time. Excuse me.
How was it in Thailand? What did you see?
Oh, it was great in Thailand. I mean, it was like a resort to us. The reason my friend was there, because he already had a brother serving in Vietnam, and at that time, I believe, unless you volunteered, they only required one family member to be in Vietnam at a time. So he had been in Thailand already for several months, so he knew, the process. We hired a taxi to kind of be on standby to chauffeur us around. Bangkok was great. Did a lot of sightseeing. Spent maybe a couple days there, and then we went, as I say, to Pattaya Beach and spent the rest of the time there at the beach. Rented a beach house. Met another, when I was on my way to Thailand from Vietnam, I became acquainted with another guy that was going there too. So he hooked up with us, and the 3 of us spent time together just sightseeing and, of course, bar hopping and, all that.
So this would have been during your time in
Right.
Chi that you...
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know how long. I don't know if it was after you were there for 6 months or whatever, but everybody there had a chance to go on R&R for a week. Most of the people that were already married, of course, went to Hawaii to meet their wives, but the rest of us, a lot of people went to Australia, and I think probably Hong Kong was another choice, and it was good.
Okay. So then you were saying that after Long Binh you went to went home.
Right, I went home for I think 30 days or whatever, and then I went to Germany, and in Germany, I'm not sure where I actually landed in Germany, but there again you processed into it, and it was lucky for me in the personnel department where I was doing the processing in. Most of the guys that were working there in the office were former teachers, and when they saw that I had been a teacher, they, I don't know if they pulled springs or what, but I ended up staying there and working in the personnel office in Germany. And my job there, I was the emergency leave person that people that had to go home on emergency leave would see me, and I would process their paperwork and cut their orders and see that they got on the plane to fly home for their emergency leave.
Okay. What was the day-to-day like with that?
That again was an office job. It was fairly, it was like working just a regular job. We go in the morning and do our job. There wasn't any direct supervision. You more or less did your job and worked. It's like an office job, working in any personnel office would be.
Did you explore any of Germany while you were there?
Yeah, I was lucky in that I actually had a cousin that was living in Germany. She was married to a Air Force, somebody that was in the Air Force, and she had a car, and she lived not too far away. She lived in Kaiserslautern, and she would come Fridays, pick me up after work, and I would go for the weekend and spend it with her and her husband, and we did a lot of sightseeing, and she knew a lot of German people. We'd go visit people in their homes, and while I was there, I took a trip to Italy with one of my roommates in Parmesan's. We went for a week to Italy on I think it was an American Express, but it was a bus tour, and got a chance to see Rome and Venice and Pisa, and that was great too. And if I had stayed in Germany longer, for the full year, I had an opportunity to take a trip to Israel, and we would go by bus to Greece and then go by boat from Greece to Israel. And it was actually for chaplain's assistance, but I would have been able to go, even though I wasn't a chaplain's assistant, I had it lined up to go. But what happened was my father was ill, and he had cancer, and he was getting near the end stages. So I myself actually got an emergency leave to fly home, and I was reassigned to Fort Devens, Mass, because my parents then were living in East Hampton, Massachusetts, and they would reassign you to the nearest base to your family. So I processed it out of the Army through Fort Devens. I never went back to Germany. One of my roommates packed up my stuff and shipped it, back to the States for me. And in Fort Devens, there again, I worked in the personnel office and just bided my time to process out of the Army.
Okay.
So I actually wasn't in for a full 3 years. I was in for more like 2.5 years.
Okay. And what was the day-to-day like in Fort Devens?
Fort Devens, it was, it's like an office job. I was in the personnel office. Most of the people in Fort Devens at that time were there because they had, unfortunately, become addicted to heroin or some drug abuse while they were in the service. And they were sent to Fort Devens to, for undergo treatment or whatever they did.
Right. So how long were you in Germany total?
Germany, I don't really know. I could check on the papers there, but it was maybe 6 or 7 months, I think.
Okay. And then how long were you at Fort Devens?
Fort Devens, not long, maybe a couple months, 2 or 3 months.
Okay. And what type of paperwork there did you do since you did emergency leave in Germany? What was...
Fort Devens, I don't remember too much about it. I know I had an office near where people would come in. I think I was sort of like the receptionist. People would come in, I'd see what their needs were and send them on to whatever help or whatever department they needed.
Okay. Were you awarded any medals or citations?
The usual things, the good conduct and Vietnam Service Medal and nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual things.
Okay. How did you stay in touch with your family?
I did it through letters mainly, but also through tape recordings. I had a tape recorder. They had a tape recorder, and we'd send tapes back and forth. And then I bought, when I was in Vietnam, I bought a movie camera, and I took some movies and would send those home.
Okay.
You know.
How was the food?
The food was pretty bad, mostly, in general. I ate out or not in the mess hall as much as I could.
Yeah.
Especially in Germany, we could go into town and eat, and there were snack bars. Even in Vietnam, in Cu Chi, there was like a snack wagon that you could get hamburgers and some American type food at.
Okay. Did you always have enough supplies?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Did you feel pressure or stress from the job?
Not really, no. I think I was lucky, compared to most of the guys who went to Vietnam, because of the getting into the computer van system and feeling relatively safe being in Cu Chi. A couple times I got a chance to go into Saigon. What would happen was one of the supply trucks would go to Saigon. The driver would always have another passenger to ride, they called it riding shotgun, but just as an extra person to go along with them, and we would take turns.
Okay.
So a couple times I got to go into Saigon.
And how was that?
It was, honky-tonk type, being young and, of course, getting a chance to get off the base and,
Right.
Mostly we just went to the bars and did stuff like that.
Okay. Was there anything special that you did for good luck?
I went to church every Sunday. It got me back into going to church, yes.
Okay. How did the people entertain themselves in the free time?
There was a enlisted men's club. We had floor shows that would come fairly often, like probably once a month or every couple of weeks. We would have the floor shows. Usually they came from the Philippines, but they were good. They would do American type music. We spent a lot of time at the enlisted men's club. There was a smaller, like a rec center type place that had pool tables and ping pong tables and books and stuff. I did a lot of reading. Every night they had a movie, and they had a outdoor screen, and they would show movies. We'd go to the movies a lot. Unfortunately, of course, like most everybody there, after I was there, like probably not more than a week, I got introduced to marijuana. Okay. And so I got high a lot while I was there.
Right.
But luckily, I never get into any of the harder drugs. Speed was very prevalent. Hash, opium, just about any kind of drugs that you wanted were very commonplace in Vietnam, at least in my experience there.
Okay. Did you ever see any USO shows?
Yes, I did. I saw I can only remember seeing one, but I did see one Bob Hope show, yes.
Okay. Now, you already talked about leave. How was the 30 days that you came home before you went to Germany? What did you do in that time?
I can't remember much about it, what we did. Of course, it was great to be home and spent time with the family. I probably took it, my family had moved from Maine to Massachusetts, and so I believe I probably went up to Maine for a few days, went to the beach, just did the usual, hung out with friends and did the usual things.
Okay. Do you recall anything particularly humorous from your time in the service?
No, not really.
Did you ever pull pranks on each other?
No, not that I can think of. We was, most everybody in the service at that time didn't want to be there.
Right.
Most people, even the ones I was with, including myself in Vietnam, were actually against the Vietnam War. But, at that time, you had no choice, really.
Right. What did you think of the officers and your fellow servicemen?
Most of the officers were great. I mean, I had no problems. The sergeants, the head sergeant, or I don't remember what their rank would be, but they were more bothersome than the officers, I think.
Okay. Did you ever keep a journal?
No.
So you were at Fort Devens when your service ended?
Yes.
Do you remember how that day went?
I was working in the personnel office. The person in charge of it was a warrant officer. He let me use his car. He had a nice MG car, so he let me use the car to drive around and do the processing out. I did. I stayed in the barracks, and a friend came and picked me up and left and went home.
Okay. How was your homecoming?
It was great, of course. At that time, I'd already been there in Fort Devens for a few months, so I was going home every weekend. So I had already kind of got back in the swing of things.
Right. Now, what did you do in the days and weeks afterwards?
Oh, when I first got out, I just took it easy for a while. And then when the school year, the new school year started, I started substitute teaching. I did that off and on for that first year. I started working on my master's at Westfield State. So, for the first year, I kind of didn't work too much. I collected unemployment. I did the student teaching to stretch out my unemployment longer. And I, was working towards my master's degree.
Did you use the GI Bill for your education?
I used the GI Bill, yes, for that when I started on my master's. And then after that first year, I had an opportunity, a business. I grew up in the florist business. My mother was a florist in Maine, and I always worked, around in the greenhouse and helping out in the florist. So a florist in East Hampton, the two owners were thinking they would be retiring not too long. So they offered me to take over the business, to learn the business. I used the GI Bill for that. The GI Bill would let you apprentice under the apprenticeship program. So the florist there would pay me, and then the GI Bill would make up the difference of what the final salary for that position would probably be. So I used, I don't know if that was for a year or two, but I used it for that also. So yeah, I did use the GI Bill.
Okay. And you eventually became a florist?
I eventually bought a florist in South Windsor, Connecticut, and but I only kept it for 3 years, and then I wasn't really making enough money to support the family, and I mean I was making money, but it wasn't. The florist business at that time was starting to decline because the grocery stores were selling flowers. I mean, funerals, a lot of people were saying donate to a charity instead of buying flowers. So the florist business turned out to be not something that I wanted to pursue, and so I took a job as a postal, with the U.S. Postal Service, and that's where I ended my career. I ended up working for the Postal Service in Hartford for 28 years until I retired.
Okay. As a carrier, or?
No, I was a clerk. I worked in, inside at the big MPO on Western Street in Hartford.
Okay. Did you make any close friendships in the service?
I did, but I didn't keep them up afterwards. I mean, because you were transitory, I made friends, of course, in Vietnam. And when I first left Vietnam, I would correspond with some of them. And a couple of the guys from Vietnam actually came to visit me in Massachusetts. And then the same in Germany. I mean, I was close with my roommates, but after I got out of the service, it didn't keep up in contact with any of them, actually.
Okay. How did your military experience influence your thinking about war or military in general?
That's a hard question. I'm against war, of course, but I realize that sometimes it's necessary. So I was drafted, and I went in and served my time. I believe that there are times when the draft is necessary, and it'll happen again, I'm sure. I'm just happy that my son was in the period where people weren't drafted, so he didn't have to worry about that, which we did. My generation, that was big on everybody's mind. When you graduated from high school, you either went in the service or tried to stay out of it as however you could.
Right. Did you join any veterans organizations?
No. When I got out of the service, that was the end of it for me. I never was interested in going to any reunions or joining anything. I just kind of wanted to forget about it.
Right.
And until the visiting Vietnam Wall came to the area, and I went to see it in Manchester, and it was quite a moving experience because I did find my friend's name that was there. I had a cousin through marriage who was killed in Vietnam also, and I saw his name, and that's why I signed up to agree to be interviewed.
Okay. How did the service and experience affect your life?
Uh, well, it affected it greatly because if I hadn't been drafted and gone to service, I would have stayed in teaching. Probably would have still been living in Maine as as a teacher or a principal of a school. Because of the service, that changed everything actually.
Right. Is there anything else you would like to add that we didn't cover?
Uh, no, it's just like I say. I feel that I was fortunate that I didn't have a lot of the problems that a lot of Vietnam veterans have. I didn't have to worry about Agent Orange or post-traumatic stress or homelessness or any of that. I just was able to transition back into a normal life and got married and had a job and had family and had a pretty normal life afterwards. I often encounter people that just never got over it. They still, they wear the Vietnam hat, and it's a big thing in their life still. Their Vietnam experience.
Yeah. Well, George, I would like to thank you for your service and for your time today to be interviewed.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming.